This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptocurrency space. Hey folks, it is clear that DeFi is continuing to drive innovation and growth in the crypto space. The Crypto Conversation sponsor BitGet has dived deep into DeFi with the recent evolution of the BitGet wallet, a self-custody multi-chain DeFi wallet. You can think of the BitGet wallet as the integration of some of the best parts of decentralized finance or DeFi with the BitGet exchange, centralized finance or CeFi structure. And it's more than just secure storage. One of the most important aspects of the Web3 BitGet wallet is BitGet Swap, which supports tokens from more than 90 different blockchains and offers cross-chain compatibility across 17 different chains. BitGet Swap aggregates liquidity across 100 DEXs and leverages intelligent routing mechanisms to provide users with the best trading prices across different protocols. So try the BitGet wallet. Download the app today. I've put a link in the show notes, or just go to web3.bitget.com. All right. Well, thank you to BitGet. And now it is on with the show. And my guest today is Aditya Das. Aditya is the head of research at Volcan Capital, a new investment fund based in El Salvador. Now, Aditya has written a report. It's a research report covering all aspects of El Salvador. It's very interesting, of course. Bitcoin features prominently, as you'd imagine. We're going to talk about all this today. But firstly, welcome back to the show, Aditya.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me. It's cool to be back. And yeah, I'm wearing a different hat this time. A new position, a new exciting opportunity. And yeah, I'm really excited to dive into it and have uncover this new exciting opportunity in Central America.
Absolutely. So I guess to begin with then, Aditya, maybe it'd be useful just to give us the broad strokes of what Volcan Capital is. I love the name.
Yeah. So there's a few moving parts, but I'll give you the top level overview. Volcan Capital is a new financial services company set up in this new sort of gold bug destination of El Salvador, and our broad goal and our aim is to create vehicles for investors to deploy capital into El Salvador. Over the last few years, we've seen this buzz around this country, El Salvador, because of their initial step to make Bitcoin legal tender. And people want to be able to invest into it. But, it's an emerging economy in an emerging region, Central America. So infrastructure and opportunities to invest or deploy capital into El Salvador, both for El Salvadorians and for foreign investors, is still nascent. So Volcan Capital was built to sort of fit this gap into the market. So create kind of avenues for investment into El Salvador and fit that gap. El Salvador needs investors. Investors want to invest in El Salvador, and Volcan Capital is the intermediary.
Yes, indeed. And, as much as El Salvador might seem like still a developing country on the global stage, which obviously it is, a lot can happen in reasonably short timeframes. We've seen this happen with countries such as Singapore, places like Dubai. A lot can happen in a decade or two, and investors presumably are always looking for the next opportunity. To leverage this, Aditya, you've got two funds at Volcan Capital. Just really quickly talk us through, I suppose, the basics of those.
Yeah. So to begin with, for this thesis of building, investment vehicles for investors to deploy capital into El Salvador, we have our two initial funds, the REIT fund and the Technology Venture Fund. So REIT stands for Real Estate Investment Trust. And that is like a legacy finance term, but also like kind of new legacy finance. So real estate investment trusts are sort of like mutual funds. So investors pool capital together and then deploy it into real estate investments. So they're quite popular in a lot of different markets because, they allow you to invest in real estate without actually having to, physically own the real estate. So, it's an opportunity to get involved in real estate, which is quite an appealing investment because you've got an opportunity to earn like yield and dividends through rent. And you also have this capital appreciation effect where the value of the real estate tends to grow over time. So this is another kind of evolution of the REIT concept because it's tokenized. So this is a tokenized real estate investment trust. So it further lowers the barriers to entry to invest in real estate and real estate in El Salvador. So you have this opportunity to buy into the real estate sector, which again has some very prevalent benefits. But in this emerging economy in Central America, kind of get it on the ground floor. In El Salvador, we're seeing these new large investments. Bitcoin City has captured a lot of eyes, but across the board, we're seeing like golf courses, resorts, like you might see in a lot of developing countries, in a very kind of pretty scenic place in the world. Expats are moving there, and yeah, it is appealing to both crypto native investors because crypto investors are always looking for investments that kind of do well outside of market conditions. Most crypto portfolios, they're sort of tied to the price of Bitcoin, but there's been a real sort of push to create like tokenized versions of real world securities because they're not as affected by like market conditions. So something like real estate, bull market, bear market, will still offer yields, will still appreciate in capital. And yeah, for non-crypto investors, investing in real estate in El Salvador has a lot of macro tailwinds, and yeah, it's an exciting opportunity. Yeah, I'm not sure if you have any other questions about the fund, or I can get straight into the Technology Venture Fund.
Yeah, no, let's go straight into the other fund, which yes, that is called the Technology Venture Fund. Similar structure, also tokenized on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Yeah, tokenized on the Bitcoin blockchain. So the similar benefits of tokenization, accessibility, an opportunity for foreign investors, lower bureaucracy. And kind of it goes hand in hand with the Technology Venture Fund, because one of the reasons we've decided to launch it is that El Salvador has emerged with incredibly progressive and innovative sort of sandbox style regulation of particularly crypto companies, but that also creates opportunities in sectors like remittances, fintech, neobanks. So we're seeing this sort of emergence of tech startups in El Salvador. So what the Tech Venture Fund will, offer investors is the chance to get in on these early stage El Salvador technology ventures and startups as they sort of emerge during this new era of, blockchain forward and Bitcoin forward legislation.
Yeah, looks fascinating indeed. And listeners, the website for Volcan Capital is Volcan.capital, and a link will be in the show notes. So, and look, listeners, when you go to the website, there'll be a prompt. You can download the El Salvador research report, which of course was authored by Aditya. And look, it's a very comprehensive report, Aditya. So do you want to just give us, I suppose, the background to the thesis with the report and kind of the broad strokes of what you're covering?
Yeah, absolutely. So the title of the report is Invest in El Salvador, which kind of gives you a hint on sort of the subject matter and the thesis behind it. So, at Volcan Capital, we really believe that El Salvador is, an incredible sort of canary in the coal mine opportunity. It is kind of emerging from this economic shadow. For years, the country struggled with issues like gang violence, corruption, There have been some major natural disasters that affected the ability of the economy to grow. But recently, a new government has been voted in, and they have sort of taken some progressive steps to, to fix this economy that was at a pretty low point. Very low credit rating on its government debt, for example, and it is really sort of, the report sort of focuses on all sectors, including the Bitcoin sector, but some of the sweeping changes that El Salvador has gone through in the last couple of years to make it far more investable, to create some incredible opportunities, unique investments, and a region of Central America that's also sort of on the cusp of something great. The report covers El Salvador as a country from all aspects, exciting sectors like agriculture, tourism, financial services, and sort of covers its history, its present, and its future.
Yeah, look, it really does. And you go into some detail. I guess just to begin with then, and you don't need to go into full detail, but just before we get into, I suppose, the Bitcoin stuff, and of course, the El Salvador president, who is a fascinating character in his own right. And of course, look, I'm aware that the Miss Universe pageant was just held in El Salvador, is underway or something, so we can talk about that as well. But do you want to just paint a bit of a picture as to where El Salvador has kind of been in the last 10 years and where it's going, just in terms of things like, cover off anything you want across, agriculture, tourism, basic public infrastructure, and the economy.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And I think where I might start is what most Google results look like maybe 5 to 10 years ago when you search for ELSA. So when you would search for El Salvador, 5 to 10 years ago, you'd probably get an article referring to it as the homicide capital of the world. It had a pretty severe issue with gang violence and just violence between gang members that sometimes spilled into local communities, but primarily was, focused on the drug trade and, trafficking to nearby countries like the USA and Mexico. But, what has happened in the last 2 years is a crackdown on, gang violence and, just gang activity. They have had their own version of martial law where gang members could be sent to prison without a trial. So, they could be picked up by the police, identified, and put straight into the prison system without much sort of operational or any real barriers. It's been somewhat controversial because, again, putting people straight into prison without a trial is quite an extreme step to take. But, it's been incredibly popular with the public. Even like the El Salvadorian church has embraced it. The Salvadoran church has embraced it. And they have really taken steps to make the country safer and more livable. We have seen examples of, people moving back into neighborhoods that were previously uninhabitable because of gang violence. You can see just a general sort of positive, more of a positive outlook from its citizens because of this sort of ability to handle this plague. Personally, I have mixed views on whether it's fair or whether people should be sent to prison without a trial. However, you can't sort of argue with its effectiveness. It has led to some massive benefits, and I mentioned earlier that it had a super high homicide rate, and that's just falling off a cliff. It's nowhere near as bad as it was. It's sort of gone down by tenths of a magnitude. So that's one place to start with. But across the board, I think the other thing to mention about El Salvador before diving into the Bitcoin stuff is its government debt and its credit rating. So, I'd say about a year and a half to 2 years ago, there were massive concerns that El Salvador wouldn't be able to manage its fiscal deficit,
Yes.
and it's I think its bond ratings were as low as you could get, so CC C minus. So just you know don't touch it. Like, this is not a government that is capable of repaying its debt, and it's almost a lost cause. But in the last, I think Moody's rate or Fitch, sorry, raised it recently and gave it a B minus. So it's managed to restructure its debt. It's had like a mini default, but that was more of a debt restructuring. And yeah, it's become one of the hottest emerging market fixed income opportunities. Big banks, big investment houses are buying into El Salvadoran bonds. And yeah, Salvadoran bonds have, if you look at the price charts for him, it's quite incredible to see that from a bond. The yields have gone down, so the government is paying less interest on their bonds because they've become more secure. And yeah, that is an indication of an economy that is, on its way up, that is getting more foreign investment, that has, handled things like poverty rate and food security and energy security, which I'll cover in the report. But yeah, there are a lot of indications. And also, if you're looking for that kind of thing, assurances from global, like the financial markets, that El Salvador is on the up and up and is making some significant improvements.
Yes, that's exactly right. And look, we should just interested in your perspectives on the El Salvador president, Nayib Bukele, because he is, as I said, he's a very interesting character. He's been driving a lot of this social, economic, and driving the change in El Salvador, and certainly responsible, I suppose, for cleaning up El Salvador's gang problem. Of course, he's not without his critics. For a while, he was very active, even on crypto Twitter, probably back in 2021 when he famously announced that El Salvador would make Bitcoin legal tender, and he was like Michael Saylor for a while, announcing public buys of Bitcoin for, I guess, the El Salvador central bank. So that's effectively what he was doing. Yeah, what do you make of him?
Yeah, I think you mentioned Singapore earlier, and yeah, El Salvador and Singapore and Dubai, and El Salvador, with the Bukele government, has shown some serious indications that they are following that blueprint, which is something that I laud them for. And I grew up in Dubai, and I've seen sort of the benefits of that sort of economic policy, where you back innovation, you back tech, you back startups. You're not intimidated by it, or you're kind of forward thinking, and you're willing to jump into these risks and these opportunities, and buying into disruptive technologies. So he has brought in these policies to reduce things like capital gains on tech innovation and tech startups, which is starting to sort of bear fruit. And you're seeing investors and people from all over the globe sort of look at El Salvador with a new lens, and looking into these opportunities there. So from that perspective, I really do sort of appreciate and laud Bukele and his government's sort of progressive financial legal policy. I will say that Naib he's a populist, Mr. Bukele, and he spends a lot of time on Twitter, and he communicates like quite publicly with everybody, and responds to comments, and that will always somehow like irk people. It's similar with somebody like Elon Musk. People don't like how much he gets into arguments on Twitter and that sort of thing. But I think he's a populist. He's a man of the people, and I think El Salvador has been crying out for some sweeping changes for a long time. Sometimes if things aren't working, you have to make changes and you have to take risks. And I think that's what Bukele has done as president of El Salvador, as the leader of El Salvador.
Yes, indeed. So, well, look, let's talk about some of Bitcoin really, and where Bitcoin adoption is at in El Salvador. I understand there are various hotspots, if you like, of Bitcoin activity, Bitcoin Beach. So, as we said before, I think it was it was in 2021. President Bukele announced that he would make El Salvador the first nation state to make a Bitcoin a legal tender. And then, as I said, he began to buy, or the El Salvador government began to purchase blocks of Bitcoin. And of course, we now have the Bitcoin bond. There's plans for volcano mining. There's Volcan Capital. Obviously this hasn't been an easy ride. It never is an easy ride, especially if you're the first country to effectively adopt a new currency. There was the World Bank, I think, took a dim view, as you'd expect, of course. Look, this is just the price you pay of being first. But things are still looking reasonably promising. I think where should we start on Bitcoin in El Salvador, Aditya?
There's quite a lot to cover there. Yeah, no, there's a lot of elements to it. Let's start with the Bitcoin law and making Bitcoin legal tender in 2021. Something I found quite interesting is looking into that decision. So Bitcoin is legal tender in El Salvador. And that was a radical step. So, legal tender means merchants have to accept Bitcoin can be used to pay taxes. Bitcoin is basically money in El Salvador and functions as such. When El Salvador made that decision, it was quite a unique one. And it's a unique country. And, some of the language in the Bitcoin law sort of alludes to this. So one, El Salvador doesn't have its own native currency. It used to have one called the colon, which was put out of circulation in the early 2000s. And now, pre the Bitcoin law and Bitcoin becoming legal tender, function with the US dollar as its only currency. Not an ideal situation because, the El Salvadorian economy is not as strong as the US economy. So earning in dollars is quite difficult when you're working in El Salvador. So I think for that reason, there was a lot of migration from El Salvador to the US. So there was this brain drain, Salvadorians moving to the US and then sending money back home, sending US dollars back home. And, El Salvador was subject to the US interest rate. It was essentially paying the US for the privilege of using its currency. And, most economists in El Salvador, said this was not an ideal situation. Losing monetary sovereignty is not, what you want to do as a country. That's a big reason why Bitcoin was adopted, to kind of find a way out of the American shadow, to establish sort of a way to kind of not get stuck in this position where you're sort of at the mercy of a larger economy. Bitcoin was sort of this like shining beacon that could act as a hedge in case the US economy did poorly, in case it devalued its currency by going into wars or whatever other reason to prop up its stock market. It just made a lot of sense for El Salvador to do this. Also, because it's such a remittance-heavy economy, Bitcoin works excellently as a transmitter currency. So for people sending money back and forth, even if they are El Salvadorians abroad, using Bitcoin makes much more sense than using things like Western Union or kind of traditional money transfer systems. There's always this sort of idea that Bitcoin is more useful in developing countries or chaotic economies. developed countries don't need that sort of alternative frictionless currency as much as developing economies do. And yeah, they took this step. There was a grassroots movement, as you alluded to earlier. There was this place called Bitcoin Beach in Azonte, which was functional before Bitcoin became legal tender, and government officials, Nayib Bukele himself, sort of saw the opportunity and the value of this central bankless, unaffected by monetary cycle currency that is Bitcoin, and decided to give it a shot and work with it. So that's the currency aspect. And Bitcoin is being used as money, but in El Salvador, but its adoption rate has been a little bit slow because US dollars, US dollar cash, it's very liquid, it's very accessible. So particularly with the older generation, making Bitcoin transfers with QR codes isn't as straightforward as paying with cash and accepting cash. So as a form of money, it's innovative, it's different, it's disruptive, and may take some time to fully bear its claws in. But it was a progressive decision that was done so that El Salvador could work into a position where it was securing its own economy and wasn't reliant on a big brother like the US to sort of determine its monetary policy. The other element of the Bitcoin story, I think, in El Salvador is what it has meant for the further peripheral benefits outside of usage as money. So El Salvador set up legislation for these things called Bitcoin service providers, which are essentially firms which offer Bitcoin related services. So this could be, wallet support, exchanges, any other form of custody, or, any sort of additional, maybe OTC services, trading services. So they have set up sort of a separate company registry and a separate regulatory framework for Bitcoin related companies and services. And we're seeing a number of exchanges, most notably Bitfinex and Binance, register in El Salvador and become Bitcoin service providers. It's El Salvador is another place, kind of similar to Estonia, similar to Dubai, where if you're a Bitcoin builder, you can come here. We'll embrace you. We have a separate regulatory framework. Everything is very clear. The language is very precise and understandable by blockchain natives and crypto natives. It's written by people who understand how this stuff works. You won't be in a position where you might be randomly regulated or sued by a securities agency. I think the other benefit of these companies, who become Bitcoin service providers over some of these other sandbox jurisdictions, is the fact that Bitcoin is legal tender. Means you sort of have a ready-made base of users. It's an exciting opportunity where as initially they made money, but also it's led to this sort of promoting a startup ecosystem, because Bitcoin is also a technology that can create a whole sector alongside it.
Yeah. Good thoughts, Aditya. Look at from, I guess, the outside looking in, it's sort of, you see the posts on Twitter of people, Bitcoiners especially, and tech people making their way to El Salvador to, just experience boots on the ground and have a look around. And, they're paying for coffee with Lightning and buying their McDonald's breakfast with Bitcoin. Not everywhere accepts Bitcoin, of course, but there are these pockets, and there are these. It's like a kind of intense series of Bitcoin meetups, but all in the same place and on steroids. And I'm sure there's a real sense of excitement. It is a potential gold rush type opportunity, because the government has the incentives that President Bukele is laying out for, not just Bitcoin businesses, but tech entrepreneurs in general to come into the country and begin new startup businesses. Well, they're probably some of the friendliest in the world, really, aren't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as you said, it's still very early doors. Some of these, you know, technological innovations, as you said, like, you know, the simplest stuff like accepting payments. Yeah, we still need to get used to that. Yeah, it's something that will take a little bit of time of getting used to it. Paying with Bitcoin, you know, scanning QR codes. Yeah, it's simple once you do it, but yeah, for the masses to start getting into that, it might take a little bit of time. And you're also, on that note, I wanted to mention is, you know, alongside the Bitcoin service provider legislation and regulatory framework, there's another framework for digital asset service providers. So this is, you know, what some people like to refer to as altcoins, but what El Salvador refers to as digital assets. So anything outside of Bitcoin has its own separate legislation and regulatory framework. So Bitcoin is money, but digital assets will also be embraced by El Salvador. So, you know, similar, there's a separate company registry. There's very clear language in the legislation about what a digital asset is and what a digital asset service is. So again, you know, exchanges, OTC desks, DAOs, you know, layer one solution tokens all have this framework in El Salvador to set up, you know, deploy projects. And perhaps, you know, the most enticing aspect is of this all is incredible like tax breaks, you know, no capital gains taxes, just a very forward looking, similar to, you know, what we've seen before with countries like Singapore and regions like Dubai, where, you know, invest, we'll create the sandbox for you to create, and, you know, broadly citizens, builders, you know, foreigners, locals, we'll all sort of benefit from the growth of the sector.
Yes, yes, indeed. Look, one of the big narratives around El Salvador is this idea of volcano energy, Bitcoin mining powered by geothermal energy. Yeah, it's a volcanic landscape. I mean, it's an incredible narrative to paint. I'm sure there's a bit of work involved in pulling that off, but how does all that kind of tie together as a, I guess, you know, it's a potent mix because you've got sustainable energy, you've got Bitcoin mining, you've got a volcano. Yeah, pretty intoxicating stuff.
Yeah, it's super exciting, and, you know, yeah, El Salvador is known as like a land of volcanoes. There's hundreds and hundreds of volcanoes across the country, and yeah, geothermal energy is renewable. It's accessible in the country, and yeah, because of this Bitcoin forward open policy, yeah, the builders like volcano mining have sort of this embracement of what they're trying to build, a lot of government support, a lot of access, and, you know, for example, in other regions like China, mining was this sort of thing that had to be kept hidden. It wasn't embraced. There was a lot of like circumspection. You know, is this bad for the environment? And, you know, miners had to work, you know, extra hard to sort of navigate this very difficult regulatory field, whereas countries like companies like volcano mining can set up in El Salvador, be embraced, have support, have that sort of security and structure. You don't have to worry about them, you know, having, you know, randomly being shut down or being targeted. So yeah, you know, we're talking, the numbers are, you know, billions and billions of dollars being deployed into these mining projects like volcano. So it's exciting, and, you know, it adds to Bitcoin's appeal. You know, we mentioned real estate earlier, but Bitcoin also has this sort of yield like investment mechanism through mining, where you're not just, you know, worrying about the price of the asset rising. you're also earning because it is creating, new Bitcoin that, almost acts like a yield or like interest.
Yeah, very much so. Look, we should also fascinated to get your thoughts on where we are, I suppose, in the Bitcoin cycle. Things are certainly heating up in the markets. Just before we do that, we kind of touched on the Bitcoin bond, or the volcano bond, I suppose that it's called as well. Do you want to just cover that off? You talked about how I think the World Bank and Moody's kind of downgraded El Salvador and said they wouldn't be able to pay off their debt. But yeah, since then, El Salvador bonds are up 62%, I think, this year, while Bitcoin is up, a bit more than that. But just reading some notes here. In January, the country, they repaid an $800 million bond, which Moody's had predicted they would be unable to do so. So, President Bukele starting to have the last laugh there as well.
Yeah. I think what the volcano bond is trying to do is quite aligned with the Volcan Capital and some of our perspectives on, both investability and like economic opportunity. So the volcano bond is a bond where it's debt, and what you're paying for essentially is, when you buy into the bond, is Bitcoin City, which is this massive infrastructure project to build like an economic zone for Bitcoiners, and sort of very futuristic, very innovative, exciting opportunity, built from the ground up, airports, resorts, offices, all powered by Bitcoin. And the other half of the bond, of what you're getting, is they'll be using it to buy Bitcoin. So there's like a yield from the infrastructure project and a yield from the price of Bitcoin appreciating and other things like mining. So, the bond has been talked about it for a long time, but it hasn't been launched yet. And that was partially because, last year, the price of Bitcoin was doing, quite mediocre, was not doing as well as people had hoped, or at the time when the bond was first initially discussed. So yeah, because half of the, investment would be used to buy Bitcoin, and obviously, timing and stuff, you're better off launching a bond like that during a period where there is demand for Bitcoin. And yeah, I think now, given market conditions and optimism surrounding, Bitcoin as investable assets from institutions, again, there hasn't been much information given out by the government of El Salvador in terms of when this bond will be launched. But I'm sure like they're cooking up something, because now that there are more eyes on Bitcoin, and it's been given a lot of sort of blue sort of badges, and people have endorsed it, and it's gotten like a seal of approval from a number of major investors. I think this bond that's half infrastructure, half invest in Bitcoin will become a lot more appealing. And I think in terms of yield and in terms of investment opportunity, the sky's the limit with that sort of thing.
Yes, indeed. I'd be remiss if I just didn't briefly cover off Miss Universe 2023, Aditya, because we said we would, and I'm just, but I've just been googling it. There's not a huge amount of, I suppose, mainstream news stories on it, but and I guess that's just more a reflection of beauty pageants, perhaps, aren't the, the mega kind of global scale events that perhaps they were a decade or two ago. But Miss Universe 2023 is indeed going to be held at the Jose Adolfo Pinera Arena in San Salvador, El Salvador, on the 18th of November. So it's a few days away. And there's a Wikipedia entry which goes through all of the participants from 85 different countries will be there. There's a photo, in fact, of Mr. President Bukele with one of the contestants. It just shows that El Salvador is indeed open for business.
Yeah, I think that's probably more of the story here is El Salvador, promoting itself, telling the world, hey, come and visit. This is a safe country. Infrastructure's improved massively, and yeah, you only really like push for global events if you feel ready, and yeah, you're not going to embarrass yourself. I think we've seen countries like Saudi Arabia and China do sort of similar things, like steps to sort of show the world that it's changed. It's not quite this bleak, dark place that you might think it is. And yeah, alongside this Miss Universe pageant, they have been hosting events for the International Surf League, big international events, Olympic qualifiers. So yeah, El Salvador is having this coming out party, both in terms of like, economics, a financial industry and a financial services sector. And yeah, also in terms of tourism.
Yeah, and I note that John Legend will be performing at Miss Universe 2023. Tell you what, who's done this very well, of course. Aditya, you will have been watching some of the big UFC and particularly the boxing crossover events hosted in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's probably, people say the proof is in the pudding, and sometimes the best way to show the world that you've changed this by, literally showing the world, what it looks like to be in, these places.
Yeah, very much so. Just as we finish off then, Aditya, just any thoughts on, kind of crypto market stuff coming up, well, 5 months away from the Bitcoin halving, give or take. We're in a window at the moment when it's possible this week that the SEC could batch approve all of those spot Bitcoin ETF applications. I think the market's view is it's probably more likely to happen in Q1 next year, early January, I think. But any thoughts on current market activities?
Yeah. You mentioned the halving 5 months away, and it's still, I think, what we should be looking at sort of broadly, and when we scope out. But there is this other event that's emerged, which is the spot Bitcoin and spot Ethereum ETF approvals. There's been sort of things that have happened in the periphery to markets in the last like 6 months or so. Primarily the Grayscale winning its court case against the SEC and arguing that if a Bitcoin futures ETF has been approved, then a spot ETF carries similar risks in terms of things like market manipulation that the SEC previously used to deny a spot Bitcoin ETF. So if they're okay with price activity with the futures ETF, why shouldn't they be okay with a spot ETF? And judges agreed with Grayscale's arguments, and now it looks like the SEC's hands are sort of tied behind their backs. They look like they kind of have to approve a spot ETF. And you can tell that particularly financial managers like, BlackRock and stuff are really sort of, going in with confidence. Like this is going to happen. They're signaling to the markets that they're ready, and they just, the last thing that has to happen is regulatory approval. So yeah, we've had this new kind of fantastic tailwind that's sort of boosted markets and created this sort of leg up opportunity. Also, just for me, I like reading things at like quite a top level and macro level, and yeah, I sense that across the board with financial investors and institutional investors that there is this sort of we want to go risk on type approach. We've been sitting on our hands. Interest rates have been high. We haven't been deploying capital. Everything has been about fixed income. The market is sort of awakening to sort of risk on opportunities and opportunities for investments that offer these kind of bigger gains. And I think to some extent, the market is kind of done with fixed income for the time being, and done with savings, and done with things like bonds, and is ready to sort of embrace sort of higher ceiling investments, things like venture investing, crypto. I feel are sort of set up to do very well in 2024. And if we continue to get like these external tailwinds, like ETF approvals, they'll only buffer the sort of wider macro perspective, where markets are ready to risk on, they're ready to invest in Asia, they're ready to buy into crypto, and I'm excited about the next 6 to 8 months.
Absolutely. Next 6 to 8 months, it should be exciting indeed. And look, perhaps the months to follow if we do indeed return to a risk-on environment. Look, thank you so much for coming on the show, Aditya, and spending some time with us. Just look, to finish off, for people who perhaps are interested in evaluating the potential of El Salvador as a new global hotspot for all sorts of activity, really, and could be some really interesting investable opportunities. I know that that's what you and the team at Volcan Capital are focused on. Look, if people are interested in learning more, perhaps even downloading that report so they can read it in full, what should they do? Where should they go?
So our website is volcan.capital. If you have any, questions or specifics about the report or El Salvador and investing in El Salvador, you can reach me on Twitter, on Telegram. I'll link those in the show notes. And just to kind of close off, I think El Salvador is an incredible opportunity. I am super excited and privileged to be a part of this project. If you could have invested in Singapore, 40 years ago, or Dubai 30 or 40 years ago, you probably would have. Hindsight is 2020, but it's rare to get these incredible opportunities to buy into, progressive emerging economies that are growing from a basement level. And it's just exciting. So looking forward to hearing what people have to say and any questions they might have.
Awesome. And yes, indeed, links will be in the show notes, as Aditya mentioned. Thank you very much, Aditya. All the best, and bye for now.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Oh, this is a full-time job. Crypto markets really are 24/7. Oh, Elon's tweeted again about Dogecoin. I don't have the time to research the technical indicators of Dogecoin. What are you doing?
I just use CopyTrader on BitGet. One click and I'm copying the trades from an experienced crypto trader. Then it just gives me all the time in the world to watch my favourite Netflix shows and do all my favourite activities.
I've been up for 24 hours, I've had 16 cups of coffee, 8 energy drinks, and that bird noise is getting on my last nerve.
I think you need to go to bed.
Yeah, I need to go to bed.
Hands off, gains up. Start copy trading on BitGet.
All right, there you go. That was a Aditya from Volcan Capital. Yeah, helping make El Salvador investable. Fascinating. It's already been fascinating just in the 2 years since President Bukele made Bitcoin legal tender. So you can only imagine what will happen across the next 2 years, 5 years, the next decade. It's only a matter of time, one would think, until the next nation state or two follow El Salvador's lead in making a Bitcoin legal tender. And then when those dominoes start to fall, that I think is when the fun will really begin. So I think that's it then, folks. Look, thank you very much for listening to the show. Please make sure you are subscribed to the Crypto Conversation in whatever podcast app you are using. But that is it for today. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin.